All right, welcome everyone to this meeting of SABR's East Coast Cooperative, a group of now 7 chapters in Eastern Canada and the United States who are cooperating to bring you more great presentations. I'm Bruce McClure, chair of the Clyde Sukeforth Chapter in Maine and New Hampshire, and tonight we have another great speaker for you. Raised by his mother in the Jim Crow South, Jim Gilliam's passion was baseball. He never commanded the spotlight, yet was instrumental in the Brooklyn Los Angeles Dodgers reaching 7 World Series, winning 4 during his career. He never had a permanent position and was frequently the subject of trade rumors. Remembered as a role player, Gilliam sacrificed his statistics for the good of the team. He was a company man. His career highlights make for a fascinating read, but there are larger stories to tell. His career closely paralleled the many groundbreaking changes in baseball in the 40s through the 1970s. His career was a journey beginning on the sandlots of Nashville to a pro career launched in the Negro Leagues to the first wave of black players breaking the segregated gates of Major League Baseball with the Brooklyn Dodgers. After his retirement, he was central in discussions of further baseball integrations, mentioned often as a potential managerial candidate before his life tragically ended due to the complications of a brain hemorrhage at age 49 on the eve of the 1978 World Series. SABR member Steve Dittmore has more than 20 years of experience working as a higher education administrator and professor. He received his PhD from the University of Louisville in 2007 and holds bachelor's and master's degrees in journalism from Drake University. A recognized researcher in areas of sport media and interscholastic athletics, Steve is an author on nearly 50 peer-reviewed journals, 12 book chapters, and more than 70 peer-reviewed presentations. And he's here tonight to discuss his upcoming book, Jim Gilliam, Forgotten Dodger. Steve, welcome. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good, Bruce. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Make me sound way more impressive than I really am. But thank you everyone for joining us this evening and to hear this story. I've given a similar type of presentation to a couple of other SABR chapters. Nashville, where Gilliam was born and lived until he was until he moved to Baltimore as part of the Eli Giants, and then I also spoke to the Baltimore chapter as well. I guess maybe before I get into kind of walking through a presentation that I put together to kind of summarize his life a little bit and hopefully entice some interest in learning more about him. I started this project in late 2019, early 2020. And then, of course, as we all know, the world kind of ceased to exist. And I took advantage of that. I leveraged my position as a faculty member at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville at that time to really get into online research, and started going through old newspapers and started requesting things through interlibrary loan. I mean, I feel very privileged to have worked with some fabulous interlibrary loan librarians that really helped me find some obscure pieces of the black press, black magazines from the 1950s that just don't circulate and don't exist. And so that really helped with the research part of it. I also started just reaching out to people through a network. Was fortunate to be able to talk with about 24 former teammates, players that were with Gilliam while he was a coach. So everybody from 1950s Dodgers down to the 1970s. I was fortunate to speak twice with Carl Erskine before he passed away. Spoke with Bobby Morgan, a member of the 1950s Dodgers, before he passed away. There's not many of those Brooklyn Dodgers that are left. I think it's down to a handful now, Sandy Koufax being one of them. The Dodgers, Koufax is just unavailable. I wasn't able to contact Tommy Lasorda or Vin Scully before either of them passed, both of whom I think would have added richly to the narrative here. But I was born in Los Angeles, have been a lifelong Dodgers fan, and had this crazy idea, as I mentioned, in late 2019, early 2020, that I wanted to write a biography. And I set out to try and find an interesting subject that hadn't been covered before. And so I gravitated toward Dodgers and fascinated by the Negro Leagues, fascinated by integration as it relates to baseball. and settled on Jim Gilliam because his name just kept appearing over and over in the Dodgers record books. And nobody, I don't think people know Jim Gilliam, but I don't think they know kind of his contribution and everything that went on with him as kind of, as you alluded to, a role player or a company man. And so then my book, I tried to take a little bit of an academic approach to it and try to weave through some narratives. And so I'll make allusions to different gates. And so one of the things that I did in the book is try to identify 4 different gates of integration in baseball. And the first one of those gates was 1947, obviously, when Jackie Robinson integrated Major League Baseball. And so that became the first opportunity for blacks to really be considered equal to Major League Baseball players. The second gate, and Gilliam was right heavily involved in this, was that unspoken quota of the number of black players that a team was going to have on a roster or on a field at any one given time. And I'll talk through some of that in a minute. The third gate then became, when does Major League Baseball allow blacks to be coaches? And you'll hear that Gilliam was one of the first. Buck O'Neil was the first black coach in Major League Baseball, but Gilliam was the third. And Gilliam was the first one to be a coach on the field. He was a first base coach for the Dodgers. Buck O'Neil and Gene Baker, after Buck O'Neil, were both kind of bench coaches that sat in the dugout, but were not physically on the field. And then the fourth gate was, when will baseball hire a black manager? And so kind of, when will baseball be fully integrated from players all the way down to the managerial ranks? And as we know, Frank Robinson became the first black manager in 1975, but Gilliam's name was talked about as far back as 1965 as someone who might be a managerial candidate. So that's kind of the through line or the narrative that I have through it, and I'll make some allusions to that as we go along. I welcome any questions at the end. I'm not going to be able to see you as I go through this while sharing the screen, so if you have questions, I'll be happy to take those at the end. But I want to go ahead and just kind of share this screen, and can everybody see that okay? All right, perfect. So this is the book cover. It comes out January 15th, I'm told, in trading messages today with the publisher. I should have PDF advanced reader copies tomorrow. We're at about 320 pages. I think he's pricing it. It's with August Publishers, pricing it around $22.95 as just a soft cover. We're not doing a hardbound cover of this. So his roots, he was born in Nashville. His parents were Catherine Duvall and James Gilliam. And I'll refer in a moment to James Gilliam Sr., but if you know Jim Gilliam, you know he went by the nickname Junior. This is not how he got that nickname. We'll go through that in a few moments as well. But there is a pattern that will exist in Jim Gilliam's life, which is his parents were extremely young when he was born. And so you see the ages there. They were married on July 24th, 1928 in Nashville. He was born 3 months later at Meharry Medical Center, which still exists in the downtown Nashville area. But the marriage licenses indicate that Catherine was 17, James was 16 at the time that he was born. James died a few months after this. He was 17 years old. He died of pulmonary tuberculosis. So Jim was left to be raised more or less by his mother and his extended family. So grandparents, there's some references he makes to grandparents helping rear him. I don't know if they were maternal or paternal grandparents. But he never had any brothers or sisters. He was an only child, and Catherine never remarried, never had any other kids. And so they went through life in downtown Nashville, living there as a black family in still segregated Nashville. 1940 census had him moving to this house on 7th Street. He lived there with one of the individuals that was a part of it was Catherine's brother that lived there, Leon, who was a baseball player in his own right. Catherine, occupation, she went to work because she needed to earn money. Barbecue pit, maid, we've seen references to both of those things, not really sure exactly what type of work that she did. In 1953, kind of as he was breaking in, he told Charles Dexter he grew up mostly outdoors because my dad died when I was 2. Again, that doesn't seem to be accurate. It's based on the death certificate. It would seem like his dad died when he was less than 1 year old, living with my grandmother. Again, I don't know if that's a reference to a maternal or a paternal grandmother. He's not clear on those things, and very little is actually known about his childhood. I did speak with his second wife, who was living, Edwina. She didn't have too many details. I spoke with two of his four children. They didn't have a whole lot of details about his upbringing. He didn't talk about it a lot. And so the places where you actually could find him quoted, there wasn't a whole lot of reference to that. So what we do know is he played in a sandlot on a block near where he went to school. He learned to play baseball through his mother, actually helped taught him. Catherine was apparently a fairly good athlete. Leon, her brother, was also a baseball player, as I mentioned. He attended all-black Fort Greene Elementary School, Washington Junior High School, and then attended Pearl High School, which you see pictured here, a somewhat famous high school in Nashville, but did not graduate. He played third base on the baseball team, was a halfback on the football team, but he went into professional baseball. That's what he wanted to do after the 11th grade. So he never did graduate high school, and that'll become kind of a through line for his life, and maybe part of the reason that he was not very outspoken and didn't engage too much in the public eye. He started working loosely, but he started hanging out at Sulphur Dell, which is the famous baseball park in Nashville that no longer exists. But during that period of time, he served as a bat boy for the Eli Giants. If you recall, or if you've kind of studied Roy Campanella's background, you know that he played for the Eli Giants at the same time that Gilliam was a bat boy. Campanella's biographer says that Campanella referred to Jim as Junior when they were at the Eli or at Sulphur Dell, which is not true, but history does a lot of things to people's memories like that. Willie White was very influential in helping get Jim integrated into baseball. And you see some quotes here from 1965 that Willie White actually brought people together, these kids, and had them play at Sulphur Dell on days that actually at the time, the Nashville Eli Giants were not in town. So, they would play integrated baseball sandlot type games inside Sulphur Dell, and Willie White was the person that had the keys and would open it up for the kids to get off the streets and just play baseball in Nashville. So Gilliam's first start was he spent the 1945 season playing with the Nashville Black Vols, was the team in the Negro Southern League at the time. They renamed themselves the Nashville Cubs, and so he went to spring training in Nashville as a member of the Nashville Cubs. But the Baltimore Eli Giants also trained in Nashville, and so the Eli Giants were coached by George Scales, who is a longtime Negro Leagues player back into the 1920s, Negro Leagues manager, coach, had some consideration for the recent Hall of Fame. The Veterans Committee did not get selected for that. And Scales, as you can see, he wasn't really enamored with Frank Russell, who was going to begin the season as a second baseman. And so Scales started looking at Gilliam and said, you get over there and play second base, basically. And so he made him a second baseman. And he also is credited with teaching him how to switch hit, and as well as giving him a nickname. And so the story goes this way, that watching Gilliam bat and flail at curveballs from the right-hand side, Scales purportedly yelled to him, "Hey, Junior, get over on the other side of the plate," and taught him how to switch hit. And that Junior nickname stuck. Now, obviously, Scales was probably old enough to be his father, so the Junior reference there is appropriate. He asked Gilliam if at any point in time he'd ever swung left-handed, and he said that at one point in time in his childhood, around the time he was 12, he fell out of a tree and broke his right arm, but he didn't want to give up playing baseball, so he would stand and learn how to swing one-handed with his left hand. So that probably helped him a little bit in the transition to the other side of the plate. So as I mentioned, 1945, his age 16 season, he was a member of the Nashville Black Vols. Little evidence of statistics or anything like that exist for the Negro Southern League in 1945. There is reference to him as a starting third baseman for an all-star team against an industrial team in Birmingham. That would have been at the end of the season. From 1946 to 1950, he played with the Eli Giants. Now, he didn't start out as a star. He didn't get a whole lot of playing time, even as an age 17 player. Started to ease into the lineup a little bit more in his age 18 season, which would have been 1947. But from 48 to 50, he was a mainstay on the Eli Giants. He played primarily second base, shortstop, and third base. 1949, the Eli Giants won the Negro League championship by defeating the Chicago American Giants. Now, this is somewhat, maybe a little bit controversial because, as we know, Major League Baseball now recognizes statistics and things like that from the 1948 season back. They don't recognize 1949 and 1950. So technically, this doesn't count as playing in a league championship game, but there was a best of four series between the top two teams in the Negro League at that time, which were Baltimore and Chicago, and Baltimore won it. In addition, East-West All-Star games, they started to lose importance, of course, as more Black players flocked to the major leagues, and there was less emphasis on the Negro Leagues and the East-West All-Star game, but Gilliam played in a total of 4 of those. He in 1950 homered in the East-West All-Star game off of Vibert Clark, and that will become an interesting little statistical note here in just a minute, as will the 1949 Negro League Championship. He's one of a handful of players that will have won both a Negro Leagues championship as well as a World Series title. That period of time, they had a great team, Butch McCord, they had Joe Black, Leon Day, Pee Wee Butts, Henry Kimbrough, and so forth. That was the 1949 team that won the Negro League championship. So there were a number of prominent Black players, older players like Day and Butts, but also then up-and-comers like Joe Black and Junior Gilliam. So 1949, his statistics, according to the Baltimore Afro-American, because again, Major League Baseball and seam heads don't really recognize this, 301 average, 85 runs and 12 triples. 1950, there's no real reliable statistics for his season there, so I wasn't able to find anything that I could kind of reproduce or replicate. Did find a whole bunch of stories in the Baltimore newspapers, both the Black press, the Afro-American, as well as the other Baltimore papers, about a Labor Day weekend series against the Philadelphia Stars that featured then World Series champion Satchel Paige, who had obviously won the World Series in 1948 with the Indians. It is I only put this in here because it's the only time that I can find that Gilliam faced off against Paige in a game. They were friends, and in fact, Edwina will tell the story of how they met. Was that she was a college student in Atlanta, had gone to Birmingham for the weekend, and there were a bunch of individuals at this bar that they were at, or this dance club, and Paige was there with Jim Gilliam, and that's when Jim started becoming interested in getting contact information and ways to reach out to Edwina. But so we know that Paige and Gilliam were friends. It's safe to assume that if Gilliam goes 3 for 4 in this game and the box score indicates that Paige started and went 3 innings and gave up 3 hits, that probably one of those at bats that Gilliam had against Paige in the first 3 innings resulted in at least 1 hit. So that's about the only real, evidence of that I could find. Here he is pictured on the 1949 team. I circled there. Other members of the Baltimore Eli Giants. Pee Wee Butts is the one on the far left-hand side of that. Henry Kimbrough on the far right. Joe Black standing up behind in the second row. So the big influences, I mentioned both of these two individuals, but Pee Wee Butts, who was the shortstop for the Eli Giants during this period of time, and Gilliam became very close. And Butts and Gilliam worked hand in hand on double plays. Butts taught him a whole lot. There's a number of quotes from Butts that I was able to find that just kind of said, playing with Gilliam is great. He knows exactly where to be and all of those things. From a batting standpoint, Henry Kimbrough, I think, who would bat leadoff for these Eli Giants teams, really was the one that helped him hone his batting eye. Kimbrough was known to have a great batting eye. And Gilliam himself in 1964 says, you know, he gives all the credit to Henry, teaching him how to learn the strike zone and not swing at a ball that's an inch off the plate. And I talked with Henry's daughter, Harriet Kimbrough Hamilton, who lives in Nashville still. And, you know, she kind of confirmed a lot of this about what her dad said about Gilliam and the stories that he told her about that team and how they interacted. So in Baltimore, Bugle Field was located at the corner of Federal Street and Edison Highway. Couple miles west of there was the home of James and Mary White, and they had a daughter, Gloria, who was born May 4th, 1933. That's all based on census records that I was able to find. And they had a son, that is Jim and Gloria had a son, James Malcolm, born April 16th, 1949. You know, James Malcolm just goes by Malcolm. Interestingly, Jim's middle name is not Malcolm. Jim's middle name is, depending on what you believe, it's either just Jim Gilliam or James William Gilliam. But never was able to track that down. It doesn't appear in official records as any one way or the other consistently. But you can see that Jim kind of did the same thing his father did, which was have a child at a very young age and get married at a very young age. So Jim was 20, but Gloria was only 15 at the time that Malcolm was born. They went and lived at another place there, 246 North Bethel Street. And then shortly after the census in 1950, they had a daughter, Catherine Mary. Catherine was named, obviously, after Jim's mother, Catherine Duvall Gilliam. And Catherine Mary just went by Kathy. And Kathy Gilliam Bellway is somebody that I talked to on a number of occasions and really kind of helped frame mainly the time after they moved to Los Angeles, but also talk a little bit about some of the discord that happened because Jim and Gloria did go through a fairly public and messy divorce in the late 1950s. So a couple of things about Gilliam and the major leagues here. So, you know, by 1950, most of the top black talent had been absorbed by Major League Baseball. Teams had come in and paid, or in some cases not paid, Negro Leagues teams for players. Gilliam actually had a tryout in 1950 with the Chicago Cubs and was released as the Cubs opted to keep Gene Baker, who would join Ernie Banks in the infield of the Cubs in the mid to late 1950s. So he wound up playing that whole 1950 season still with the Baltimore Eli Giants. Contract was purchased by Joe Black in October of 1950 by the Dodgers. There's a whole part of the book that I get into about who was credited with this. Branch Rickey claims he was credited with it, but based on when we see the contract signed and things like that, it doesn't seem like Rickey was still with the Dodgers. He left the Dodgers in October 1950, you know, had his share or ownership bought out by Walter O'Malley. So there's a little bit of controversy over the cost, how much they paid, and who actually did this. So he spent the 1951 and 1952 seasons with the Montreal Royals, the same team that Jackie Robinson spent 1946 with. And this is kind of evidence of that second gate, or that quota that I referenced earlier, which is by no reasonable measure, and I'll get into this in a minute, but Gilliam didn't need to spend 2 seasons in Montreal, and I think his stats here in a moment will show you that. He won the 1951, 50, 51, 52, 53 Caribbean World Series with Santurce Cangrejeros. In the 1952-53 season, he was paired with, I never could find the rights to this photo. So unfortunately, I can't use the photo in the book because we don't know who owns the copyright on it. And I even contracted the Roberto Clemente Foundation and they don't know. But Clemente was the last person added to the roster. He was an 18-year-old reserve outfielder on that team in the 1952-53 Caribbean World Series. He was nicknamed Black Sea. Because the shortstop on the team, who was white, the Puerto Rican fans started talking about them as the White Sea and the Black Sea because they covered so much ground in the infield. And that's a story that Thomas Van Heining, who's an expert on Puerto Rican baseball, has written a number of books on, one solely on the Cangrejeros, but then also one on the Caribbean World Series. He was gracious to help share some of those stories with me that he had picked up along the way. So I mentioned Montreal. Interestingly enough, Montreal, he made his debut in 1951. He was in the lineup as a second baseman, but was moved to left field before he even played a defensive inning because Al Gianfrido, who was a member, obviously, of the late 1940s Dodgers, was ejected for arguing a balls and strike call in the top of the first. So he was sent to left field. And the story goes that the first ball that was hit to Gilliam in the outfield, he dropped. Um, the manager of Montreal at the time was Walter Alston, and Walter Alston will, of course, become the Dodgers manager from 1954 on, and really was, he and Gilliam were very tight. They very much were company individuals that just did whatever the Dodgers management wanted them to do and signed whatever contract was put in front of them and didn't try to do anything to disrupt kind of the status quo there. By mid-June 51, the New York Daily News is writing about Gilliam being groomed to succeed Jackie Robinson at second. It was true that Gilliam was playing the same position that Jackie was at that point in time. Shortly thereafter, or maybe around the same time, I don't remember the exact date, but you see he went for 8 with 3 walks and a grand slam and a doubleheader at Buffalo. Clearly had statistics in 1951, batting 287 and all of that, but he lost the MVP vote by 1 vote to his teammate Chico Rodriguez, who would go on to play in the majors for a couple of seasons as kind of a utility player. But Rodriguez was about 30 or 31 years old at the time, so he didn't have a whole lot of major league career left ahead of him. Gilliam was still in his early 20s. I think this would have been his 21-year-old season at this point in time. So 1952, he does win the MVP of the International League, leads the league in runs, stolen bases, finishes second in RBIs. And so this quota idea is in 1952, the Dodgers had effectively 5 black players. Now, Don Newcomb was not on the active roster. He was serving overseas in the military, which was the whole reason that Joe Black was added to the roster. But there was kind of this point of 4 black players on a roster that nobody had really exceeded at that point in time. In fact, the Dodgers sold off Sam Jethro, who was major league ready, to the Boston Braves for $125,000. Now, you can argue that that was a pure financial play because the Dodgers had bought him after the 48th season for $5,000. So pretty nice ROI for the Dodgers on that. But the Dodgers weren't ready to put Jethro in the lineup alongside Campanella, alongside Robinson, alongside Newcomb. So not having 4 black players in the lineup. And there was a Steve Trader wrote in the Journal 9, if you're familiar with the academic Journal 9, in kind of studying this second wave of black players. So this is kind of that second gate. So you've got Gilliam, you've got Doby, you've got all the, Monty Irvin, that first wave of black players, Satchel Paige, et cetera. That second wave, which is Gilliam and others, his point was no one would seriously argue that the players that the Dodgers kept, Bobby Morgan and Rocky Bridges, were better players than Gilliam. Had he not been African-American, it's not inconceivable that Gilliam would have had to wait until 1953 to get his first major league at bat. The 1953 season here, he picks up a nickname, the Devil. Gifford, Florida is a little town next to Vero Beach that was in the 1950s primarily the black town in that area. Vero Beach was still pretty white, still pretty segregated. But the black area in Gifford is where black Dodgers would go to the barber. They would go to the movies as families and things like that because they couldn't do those things there. So the story goes that Gilliam walks into a pool hall, slaps $20 on the table and says, "Who wants a piece of the devil?" And from that point on, he was known primarily to his teammates and to his coaches as the Devil. So he's got the nickname Junior. He's got the nickname Devil. Carl Erskine also told me that they called him Sweet Lips because of the way that Gilliam would pucker his mouth when he was getting ready to swing the bat. So he had a whole bunch of nicknames. Whether he actually was a good pool shark or not, we don't know. He later would joke that if somebody had challenged him, what would he have done? He said he'd take his money and run out of the room. So it's not sure whether or not he actually was a good pool shark. We do know he was a very good card player, and that was confirmed to me by a number of people. I talked to Wes Parker, that Gilliam beat in bridge, and Wes Parker was a bridge champion. And then he was quite a good poker player. They would play at these. Ron Say told me that when they were in the 1970s flying on the plane, that there was a couple of card tables, and the card table in the way back was the one that was very serious, and he never put his money down, but he would watch. And he said he never actually saw money changed hands, but he knew that Gilliam pocketed quite a bit once the plane landed. So we know that he was pretty good at those things. So the Dodgers and the Braves played a series of spring training games on their way north from spring training, including this game on Easter Sunday at Sulphur Dell, in which 12,000 fans attended, including 6,200 paying colored fans. You see a picture there of how they had to expand the outfield seating to accommodate that. Gilliam singled off Warren Spahn in the third, scored the game's first run. And there's a whole controversy about what's going to happen, because at this point in time, Gilliam has not been added to the roster. So he's still a minor league player. And that's the other thing about baseball at that time, is teams could stash these players in the minors for as long as they wanted to without any sort of fear for free agency. The reserve clause was very powerful at the time. So were the Dodgers going to add him? And when they did finally add him, what happened is Alston moved Jackie to third, or excuse me, Chuck Dressen, who was the manager at the time. Dressen was manager at the time, moved him Jackie to third, and that sent Billy Cox to the bench. Well, Billy Cox protested, not so much about Gilliam and not so much about Jackie, but he protested about the fact that a black player had taken his spot on the team, and that he was relegated to this role play and on the bench. And so there, Roger Kahn writes about it in Boys of Summer, if you've read that. And then there were some other newspaper articles that I found that kind of framed it all up and whatnot. His 1953 season, he didn't start off terribly great, but he finished very well, won the Rookie of the Year, led the league with 701 plate appearances, 17 triples. He also, obviously the Dodgers played the Yankees in the 1953 World Series. He played 55 and 56. The asterisk next to 55 just indicates that the Dodgers won that World Series. So he played in 3 World Series during his time with the Brooklyn Dodgers. 1956 is arguably his best year statistically from an offensive standpoint. Was the All-Star, finished 5th in the MLB voting that year. Even though he made the All-Star team, he did not appear in the game. Interestingly, if you go and look at the box score of the 1956 All-Star game, it's loaded with Cincinnati Reds, particularly on the infield. And so he was behind players who were would become less well-known later on. But that's just the way that things operated in the 1950s. I don't know that race necessarily kept him out of that lineup at that point in time, but I suppose that's a possibility. He recorded the final hit in Brooklyn Dodger history. So if you're ever at a bar and that comes up as a trivia question, who had the last hit? Jim Gilliam. Team moves to Los Angeles. Gilliam is very much front and center to this. He is one of the few players that gets off the plane in Los Angeles and is there on the tarmac as Walter O'Malley is welcomed to Los Angeles. Duke Snider, who lived in Southern California, was also there. Gilliam, Walter O'Malley, and a couple of others. But he was very much a prominent part of the Dodgers transition, used in marketing materials for the Dodgers, promotional things like that. He, as you see, played in 4 World Series with the Dodgers, was a member of the 1959 NL All-Star team. That was for the second game, back in that period of time, late 50s, early 60s, they played 2 All-Star games. He was part of the second game that actually took place in the LA Coliseum. And in that, he hit a home run in the 1959 All-Star game. So another fun trivia answer is the only player to ever homer in both a Negro League's East-West All-Star game and the Major League Baseball All-Star game is Jim Gilliam, the only player to ever do that. Now, again, the 1950 East-West All-Star game was maybe not as prominent as it was in the 1930s and 40s, but still, nonetheless, he's the only player to do that. Scored the first run as a Dodger, hit the first Dodger home run at Dodger Stadium in 62, scores the winning run of the 1963 World Series in which they blanked the Yankees 4-0. In 1964, he suffered kind of what was his worst year as a player. He batted in the low 200s, lots of stories about whether his speed had diminished, things of that nature. He retired at the end of the season and actually took over Leo DeRocher's spot as the first base coach for the Dodgers. But in the 1965 season, he began as a coach, but was activated when Tommy Davis slid into second base and broke his ankle, and the Dodgers needed some offensive pop. And so Walter Alston trusted him and activated him. And Gilliam went on to have a wonderful year in 1965, was very integral to them making the World Series. And as you see, he finished 30th in the MVP voting, not outstanding, but he certainly was getting garnering recognition for that. Similar thing happened in 1966, where the Dodgers, he began the season retired as a coach and then went on to be activated later on, although the 66 season he did not have as quite a good success with the team. So one of the things that he is most known for, and hopefully this will work and you'll be able to hear the audio and see this, but let's set the stage in the 1965 World Series. And I begin the book kind of in media res and look at this play because it is integral and central to the Dodgers winning the 1965 World Series. You remember that this is the series when Koufax did not start the first game due to Yom Kippur. And, the Dodgers were locked at 3 games apiece with the Minnesota Twins. Koufax comes back on 2 days rest to start game 7. He does not have a curveball. All he's got is a fastball, and he's just out there gutting it out. The Dodgers had taken a 2-0 lead into the bottom of the 5th. Frank Quillisi is on second. There's a runner on first, 1 out, a 1-2 count on who would become the 65 AL MVP, Zoilo Versalles, and he had been ripping the ball off the Dodger pitchers the entire time during the series. And Vin hopefully will share this with you. Hopefully this works here.
Gilliam with a big force. What a play. And that would have been a double and at least 1 run batted in, and we had better take another look at that one. Gilliam was guarding the line to cut down the chance of the extra base hit, and it turned out to be the play. Here it comes. He would not have had any other play except to go to the bag.
So there we go. Sorry about that. So you can kind of see these images, and we did get one of these images from Getty for the book, just to kind of illustrate how close this was to being by him. I talked to Wes Parker, who was across the diamond at first base, and he just marveled at the play, but knew Gilliam's baseball IQ, which becomes a theme throughout his life, is he was just a smart baseball player, never made a mistake, never threw to the wrong base, always knew where to be positioned. And after the game, Gilliam said he was actually cheating toward the third base line because he knew that Versalles throughout the series had been pulling the ball well down the line, so he had himself in position. I talked with a future Dodger, Darryl Thomas, who was growing up in Los Angeles at the time. I think he was about 12, 13 years old, living near Crenshaw. I think he went to Crenshaw High School. And he commented about this play and says, he thinks it was the best defensive play a third baseman's ever made in a World Series. And obviously Greg Nettles made some great plays on the Dodgers in this 1970s as well. But this one at a pivotal moment in time in the game, got the force out. Koufax got the next guy to pop out, and that was just kind of that was it. Nobody else did anything. Now, interestingly, when the 1965 season, prior to the 1965 season, the Dodgers had traded Frank Howard to the Washington Senators and acquired John Kennedy as a third baseman to kind of fill in as a consistent third baseman. Kennedy did not hit well. He was an all-field, no-hit kind of player, and Gilliam actually was replaced in the bottom of the 9th for defensive purposes in this game. And you can kind of hear if you go to watch it on YouTube, you can hear Vin Scully, Ray Scott, kind of almost use air quotes when saying, he comes up and replaced for defensive purposes. It was just kind of ironic about that. Some other career facts, I mentioned this. He was the only player to hit a home run in both of those games. He's one of 4 players to win both the Negro Leagues championship and a World Series: Monty Irvin, Larry Doby, Satchel Paige. Gilliam and Irvin are the only players to win. If you add a Caribbean World Series to that list, they're the only 2 players to win all 3 of those things. He played in 7 no-hitters, including starting all 4 of Koufax's no-hitters. He coached during 2 others, and he managed a perfect game. So the 7 no-hitters, all 4 of Koufax's, Don Larson's perfect game. Carl Erskine had a no-hitter in 1956, as did Sal Magley for the Dodgers. So that was kind of his career. He managed a perfect game. Baylor Moore, who played with the Montreal Expos the one year that Gilliam managed in Puerto Rico, threw a perfect game during that period of time. He is the only player to play on 4 World Series championship teams in Dodger history. Now, there is a bit of an asterisk that goes with this, in that Koufax was on the roster for 4, but did not play in the 55 World Series. And Johnny Padres was on the roster for 4, but did not play in the 1965 World Series. So Gilliam is the only Dodger to play on 4 World Series championship teams, at least to get into a box score. Reese, Hodges, Ferrillo, and Gilliam played in 7 total World Series. You see the other statistics. So he is 8th in World Series history in bases on balls, 11th in games played and plate appearances, all time, all teams. Top 10 in Dodger history in a number of offensive categories, including position player WAR. Right up there with bases on balls, kind of indicative of his good batting eye and things like that. His post-playing career, I mentioned that he was named first base coach for the 1965 season. He coached the Dodgers from 65 to 78. Worked with the infielders a lot during that period of time. Tommy Lasorda, when he got the managerial job in 77, named him the hitting instructor for the Dodgers. Alluded to the San Juan Senadores, managing that team during the 73-74 season. Was mentioned as a possible managerial candidate often. Found a ton of articles in Jet and other magazines that talked about who will be the first Black manager. And it was always the same names. It was Hank Aaron, it was Willie Mays, it was Ernie Banks, it was Jim Gilliam, and so forth. He never obviously got that opportunity. So he suffered this cerebral hemorrhage at his home in Los Angeles on September 15th, 1978. For whatever reason, and it's still not clear, he had gone to the ballpark but had come home, and nobody was at home. Edwina was working. She worked in the healthcare industry as a nurse, so she was working at a hospital. The kids were at school, and apparently he suffered this hemorrhage, and it's still not clear. Kathy couldn't recall, and neither could Daryl, his son, who found him. Edwina didn't know. She just got a call at the hospital and rushed to Daniel Freeman, which is not where she was working. She was working at a medical facility at UCLA. He never regained consciousness, passed away on October 8th, 1978, 2 days before the World Series. You see that the funeral was held a few days later. On the morning of Game 2 of the World Series, the Dodgers had won Game 1 against the Yankees. This was Game 2. Because the national media were in town, it was a well-attended thing. Estimates put it at 3,000 people attending the funeral service. He was interred then at Inglewood Park Cemetery in Los Angeles, where a number of other prominent Black individuals are buried, along with many others as well. Some kind of honors for the Dodgers, or honors in Los Angeles, rather. Jim Gilliam Park and Recreation. This was through a donation by the Anheuser-Busch Company to help fund this park and the Jim Gilliam Senior Citizen Center that's in Los Angeles. He had his number retired 19, and this was an interesting story. This was announced at his funeral that his number 19 would be retired. So remember, this is 1978. And at that point in time, the only Dodgers with their numbers retired were Sandy Koufax, Jackie Robinson, and Roy Campanella. They had their numbers retired in the early 1970s. Walter Alston hadn't officially had it, but he would come shortly thereafter to have his number 24 retired. But this was not a common practice in baseball at that time. And from that moment on, that Gilliam's number was retired until just recently. The Dodgers had a policy where the only people whose numbers were retired were Hall of Famers. And so at the time that I was doing research and doing interviews, I did speak with Peter O'Malley. I spoke with Fred Clare. Fred actually was gracious enough to write the intro to the book. And both of them owned up to, yeah, we made this decision. We would make it again today. We think he was a Hall of Famer from a Dodger standpoint. Jim Gilliam never got one single vote for the Baseball Hall of Fame. No sports writer ever voted for him. And there's really no evidence that he was even on a ballot. And so I do spend some time in the book talking about that and what an oversight in my mind that is. Is he a Hall of Fame player? Maybe not, but there are plenty of players with far less credentials than he is that have gotten consideration for that. So I want to leave you with this. This is outside the Nashville stadium. At the time, they dedicated Junior Gilliam Way, which runs in front of the stadium. They had this ceremony, and they had, hopefully this works, Vin Scully speak. No,
ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to the field and
Even though I can't be there, I am certainly with you in spirit as you take the time to honor one of my all-time favorite players and gentlemen who wore a Dodger uniform. I was very close to Jim Gilliam when I first came up, and he treated me as if I were a veteran. I was anything but it was typical of Jim to sit and chat and talk about his days playing. And so now the years have rolled by. This is my 66th year doing Dodger games. But when I look back over the players who wore the uniform, certainly Jim is a standout without a doubt. I remember one time at a banquet, I had been introducing each Dodger player, so-and-so the second baseman, so-and-so the shortstop, so-and-so the outfielder. And then for whatever reason, I said, and now here is Jim Gilliam, baseball player. And that just seems to blow the audience away. They thought that was the best tribute that I could give him. And I guess to think about it, I was glad that I did. He was a wonderful human being. And I'm thrilled, as I said at the outset of this, to play a very small part, tipping my hat and opening my heart to the memory of Jim Gilliam.
So that is it. I didn't include, I probably went a little more detailed on a couple of things than I intended. And so there's some things that I kind of glossed over, but I would love to have any questions and have anything that I can do to answer that.
If you have a question for our presenter, Steve Dittmore, tonight, go down to the bottom of the screen and hit react. You will see another button that says raise hand. And then clicking that will get you in line to ask your question. Ken Edwards, you are up. How you doing tonight, Ken?
Great, Bruce. How are you?
Fantastic. Glad to see you.
All right. Steve, thanks for your great research, and I look forward to reading the book.
Thank you, Ken.
During the research that you did perform for the book, did you come across any stories on the consideration that the Dodgers may have given to hiring Gilliam as the manager in 1976 instead of Tommy Lasorda after Walter Alston retired?
So yes, there were stories, but more specifically, I asked that question of O'Malley and Clare and Ron Say and others. And even I asked Dusty Baker as well. And Dusty, who was very close to Gilliam, said that he didn't think that Gilliam really wanted that. You know, part of it is that he wasn't as comfortable talking in front of the media. He wasn't the gregarious sort that Tommy Lasorda was. And that in combination with the fact that the players that were emerging on that era of Dodgers had all played for Alston, or excuse me, all played for Lasorda in the minors in Spokane and other places like that. That really drove O'Malley, and Clare wasn't in a GM type role at that point in time. He was in the front office of the Dodgers, but that really kind of informed their decision that Lasorda was the right person for that. And I think, you know, the cynic in me would probably say, well, that was the reason that Lasorda made him hitting instructor, was just as kind of a, oh, here's something else, you know, another way to recognize you a little bit. But, you know, I asked Edwina about it, his widow, and, you know, she said he would have been happy doing whatever the Dodgers asked. He didn't campaign for it. I go into actually in fairly good detail, a kind of a barb that he had with Maury Wills in the early 1970s, in which Wills was actively campaigning to replace Alston. I mean, he was out there talking about his credentials and, I should be the next Dodgers manager. Gilliam wasn't doing any of that. And in fact, Wills called out Gilliam a little bit and said some things that were kind of disparaging about Gilliam about it. And that's interesting because the one thing that I didn't get into in this talk was the relationship that those two had and how influential Gilliam was in helping Wills break the stolen base records. And that was basically the Dodgers offense in 1963 World Series, was get Wills on base, have him steal second, Gilliam hits behind him, moves him to third, and then Tommy or Willie Davis hits him home with a sac fly, and that was the offense. So, but yeah, I mean, I did explore that, and the answer kind of checks out to me, but it's disappointing, I think, from my perspective. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ken.
And Maury Wills had an interesting tenure as manager of the Seattle Mariners years ago, did he not?
Not very good. Not very good.
I seem to recall him fooling around with the batter's box at one time, and that's what got him launched by Seattle. Let's move to Alex Stace. Alec, you can unmute and ask your question of Steve Dittmore.
Thank you. Yes, as domiciled in Seattle now, happily did not overlap with the Maury Wills era, but noted.
Yeah.
I guess I always thought of Gilliam as being very much like Elston Howard on the Yankees, like a real team guy, somebody that was always there, got moved around, got overshadowed by Yogi Berra, but was always a clubhouse presence and somebody that, I think is a part of the Yankee lore, but somewhat overshadowed and somewhat overlooked in general. So interested whether you thought there was any parallel there. This is a great story though, and his story stands on its own, but I just think they're interesting.
Yeah. No, thank you. I appreciate that. Admittedly, as a lifelong Dodger fan, I don't read a whole lot of Yankees material. But I think what really kind of reinforced the I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, but the reverie that people had for Gilliam, the players and everybody that he was associated with, was I talked to several teammates or players that were on teams in the 1960s. So Pee Wee Oliver, Nate Oliver, John Werhaus, some of these kind of fringe players that were supposed to replace Gilliam in the lineup. They would get their chance, but they would kind of flame out, and Gilliam would be there to kind of pick up things, and was kind of that steady veteran presence. There's a story that I got a couple of really good stories from Al Ferrara when I talked to Al, and Al talked about one time after he'd had a good game in the late 1960s for the Dodgers, when he was being interviewed, Gilliam was walking by him. This is when Gilliam was a coach, and he's overheard Ferrara talking to the media and like, oh yeah, this guy threw me this fastball and I hit it. And Gilliam pulls him aside afterwards and is like, what are you doing? Don't ever talk to the media about what you're looking for and how you got to the pitcher. Don't give away your secrets and things like that. And then Ferrara related the time when, after he got to the Padres, that Chris Cannizzaro, who was a catcher for the Padres in the 60s, actually played for the Dodgers for a brief bit in the early 1970s. He asked him who was the most difficult Dodger that you ever faced. And Cannizzaro hated when Gilliam would get to bat, because what happened is Gilliam would square around to bunt and he would aim the bat or hold the bat right at eye level. So Cannizzaro couldn't see where, if Wills was taken off or if anything like that. But that's just kind of like the intelligence that he had, Bobby Valentine, Billy Grabarkowitz, some other players that I talked to from the early 1970s, they all said the same thing. They just said he was a wealth of knowledge and you just learned so much from him, but he was never that dominant presence. In fact, the only time I could find Jim Gilliam in his actual voice, the only time I could ever actually hear his voice, was the Dodgers in the 1960s with Union 76 put out a collectible series of 45 records. And it was these little 5-minute interviews that Scully does with players. And there's one person on one side and another person on the other side. And a friend of mine that helped me, has an amazing collection of Dodgers memorabilia, helped me with this. And he has a copy of the record. And so I played it and recorded it. And it's about a 5-minute interview. And it's the only time I've ever heard Jim Gilliam speak. Because there's just nothing else out there that I could find that is actually his voice. And part of that's just because he wasn't interviewed a lot for that. I read through Los Angeles Times and all that throughout the 1960s. They're not really interviewing Gilliam unless he was a key factor of the game. So, yeah. Thank you for the question, though. Appreciate it, Alec.
David Langston, you're up. How you doing, David? You are on mute, my friend. You've got to unmute. Sorry about that, everyone. There you go.
Okay, glad to be here. Great presentation, Steve.
Thank
I
you.
look forward to reading the book and sharing the book. The reason that I joined actually is I got this print at a flea market about 25 years ago, and it's been bugging me for years, and I did a painting of it. So the painting came out pretty well, and there's a pencil note at the bottom of this print that says it's Junior Gilliam, but the numbers don't match up. I'm wondering, Bruce, is there a way to share it? It's I've got it up on my screen.
Do you have it on your screen?
Yeah.
Steve?
I bet I know it. Does it look like number 35?
No, this is
okay.
I've had Giants and Dodgers fans look at this for 10 years and nobody can figure it out.
We'll take a look.
So let's do this.
Okay.
David, you should see the share button on the bottom of your screen right now.
I see it.
Click share.
I did.
Now click the piece that you want to share that's on your computer. Do you have that picture up?
Yes, sir.
Click that picture.
Yep.
And then hit, I believe there's another share button there. You should be able to do that. There it is. Here he comes.
Oh, shoot.
Right.
I didn't enlarge it.
That's okay. Double click on that picture there. There we go. There it is.
Okay, so let's see if I can get the pencil note.
Brooklyn Giant game 1953, Junior Gilliam 44, that looked like.
Which doesn't make sense. So here's the deal, Steve. I spent a couple of months doing a painting of this thing.
Yeah.
And I want to say who it is. I don't care about the numbers, but it's kind of a memorial. When I started the painting, I assumed it was Junior. But now I don't know who the heck it is because the numbers don't match anybody.
No, so I asked about 35 because in spring training in 1953, Gilliam was assigned number 35. And there are pictures of him that circulate pretty widely on the internet. I have a 8x10 print of one of those that we're using in the book in which he's wearing 35. But as soon as he got added to the active roster, he was converted to 19. So 44 is certainly not a number that I've ever known that he wore. Even if I were to go,
Bruce, could we send this out across the membership for maybe somebody can ID the darn thing?
You know what? Send me an email directly. Do you have my email address?
I do not, but I'll write it down.
I'll drop it into the chat for you, and we'll see as if we can get that out to membership. See as if anybody can.
Would you like to see the painting?
Sure.
Oh yeah, that's nice.
Wow.
That's very nice.
It came out pretty well. And if I knew who it was, can you see my cursor?
Yeah.
If I knew who it was, I'd put their name down here by, left of the umpire. Somebody said, well, maybe it's Willie and he's in the wrong uniform, but it's obviously a black star because you can't get that high off the ground if you're not good. I mean, the glove is like 12 feet in the air, easy.
Yep.
So I would love to know.
And it looks like it's coming from the second base position on the second base side of the bag. And Gilliam actually never played shortstop in the major leagues. He played every position in the major leagues except for shortstop, catcher, and pitcher.
Right, I know that.
Yeah, he appeared at first base for a few innings. He appeared all over the outfield, but never played short.
The thing I like the most about his story is that I do a lot of strategic branding for personalities, for executives. And I really like the fact that he didn't have one particular crazy talent that got him into the Hall of Fame, but he was a star to his fans for, a couple of decades based on his willpower to do it well. I mean, from the very beginning, learning how to bat from the other side. I mean, come on, that's a lot of work.
It absolutely was. there's so much more about his life that I didn't get into because I wanted to make sure that I covered kind of the baseball highlights of this. But he was a successful business person. He worked in alcohol sales, as an ambassador for alcohol brands. He was involved in a lot of ads in the 1950s and 60s, both as a member of the Brooklyn Dodgers, Los Angeles Dodgers. He was real good friends with Nat Cole. In fact, his son dated Natalie Cole during a period of time in high school. So, I mean, they were part of kind of a Los Angeles elite. And Edwina, and we actually have this in the book, she was recognized as one of the top 10 dressed women in Los Angeles or something like that. So, I mean, they were part of pop culture in Los Angeles.
Ken
Well,
Edwards,
I'm
you're up
really
again.
looking forward to reading it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just have one last question. In looking at Gilliam's baseball reference page, he had a 67%. He was known as a runner with good base running skills, but his stolen base percentage was only 67% success rate.
Yeah.
Can you comment on that? And did that come up in your research? Because that would not be considered excellent base stealing.
No, I don't think he was a good base stealer. I think he was a smart base runner. So going first to third when you needed to go first to third, things like that. I think those are the things, those kind of intangible things. In fact, in the 1963 World Series, there was a play that Gilliam basically scored the only run on, and it was because he was going to reach first on an error, but he knew Dodger Stadium and he knew the fact that the ball had gotten past, I think, Skowron may have been the first baseman for the Yankees at the time. My memory is failing me on that. But the ball got past.
Pepitone was the first baseman for the Yankees.
It was Pepitone, yep.
Skowron was on the Dodgers that year.
Yep. So Pepitone loses the ball in the white shirt sleeves of the daylight in Dodger Stadium and can't see it, misses the ball. It goes up the line, and Gilliam knows Dodger Stadium and how big foul territory is, makes it all the way to third base. Just stuff like that. He scored. There was a play that he scored on. Tony Oliva commented at the 65 World Series that he scored from second on a ball that was kind of a blue pit, but it was just that he got a good jump, got a good read on it. And by the time Oliva fired home, he's like, I had no idea he was that fast. But to your point, no, he was not a great base stealer. He did not have good success with that. And if you're looking at his baseball reference stats, you can see that after they moved to Los Angeles, he rarely tried to steal. I mean, it was mainly the time in Brooklyn that he was doing that.
Yeah.
Alec made a couple of good comments in the chat. He said the rate was lower back then, more like about 60%, I believe. And then there is a graph that he has there that there it is coming up for me now. Runners are more successful than ever from The Athletic. It looks like it'll give you a little information on that. Dixie Tarango, you are up. How you doing, Dix?
I'm doing fine.
Good to see you.
That picture needs to go to the SABR Pictorial Committee.
That is exactly what I was thinking. Thank you for that.
That's why we have one.
There you go. There you go. David, I'll help you get in touch with the Pictorial Committee on that. Dixie is spot on. That's where I was going to start, as well as the SABR online community. So we're going to get you some help on that, okay?
Terrific. Thank you. Then, we can make the stuff available over the your network if you want.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to know if that is Gilliam, what the context is, because it certainly doesn't resonate with. So what did it? Wait a second. What did it say? It said Giants, and what else at the bottom of it? Does it say Dodgers?
Yes.
Well, because now I was wondering, I don't know what number he wore with the Elite Giants, and so now I'm wondering if the Giants was a reference maybe of the Elite Giants.
Well, that's what I was thinking as well, but I had no way to figure that out.
It says Brooklyn Giant game, 1953, Junior Gilliam 44. And something tells me, and I'm looking at the picture again. I wonder if it doesn't look like a Brooklyn Dodgers uniform.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Which indicates to me that you might be right, but we're going to get him in touch with the pictorial community and see if we can get him some help with that too.
I mean, it could have been like the New York Black Yankees or,
right.
some
there's There's no
team.
44 in the Dodgers from 52 to 56 other than Bob Aspromonte, who that is not.
It's very clearly not Bob
There you go.
Aspromonte.
Alec comes through again. Ben,
Yeah.
you had a comment that you wanted to make?
Yeah, I just thought it's kind of funny. It's too bad because in those days, there's no player names on the back of uniforms.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? Like, it's like, I know, you could at least see something, right?
Yeah. It's a good point. It's a very good point. Steve, tell them when that book is going to be out and how they're going to be able to get it.
Yeah, so I appreciate that. Thank you so much. So the plan is a January 15th publish date. We've just finalized my publisher, as I mentioned, I think right at the beginning, we should be getting advanced review copies in PDF this week, hopefully still. It will be available. August Publishing is the publisher on it. I don't know exactly how distribution is going to work. I imagine Amazon will be a prominent place that one can find it.
Of course, Amazon will have it.
I do have a personal website, stevedittmore.com, and I do have a section of that is devoted to this book. And Bruce, after you get the link to your YouTube, I'll put it up there because the link to my presentation to the Baltimore chapter is on there as well. And so kind of a way to plan to use that a little bit more as we get closer to that period of time for pre-orders and things like that. $22.95, I do know, is the final price that the publisher has set it at. So, hopefully it's only softback. We're not doing a hardbound version of it or anything like that. I think the plan is to have, e-reader copies as well, if you're into Kindle and those things.
Good.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're going to have two great presentations for you next week. On Monday, September 23rd, we'll have fellow SABR member Clement Hamilton with us to give his Malloy Conference presentation entitled Roster Management and On-Field Success in the First Negro National League. And on Wednesday, September 25th, we'll have Don Slavic with us to give his SABR 52 presentation. A hit model from the MLB 2023 season are the things they call ground balls still outs. Each meeting begins at 7 p.m. Eastern, and sign-up links are in the SABR calendar at sabr.org/events. And finally, please like and subscribe to our channel to be alerted to all of our uploads. And if you are a baseball fan watching this, you need to join the Society for American Baseball Research, the premier baseball community, offering an amazing baseball buffet of options to explore your fandom. SABR boasts more than 35 different research communities, over 80 regional chapters, and innumerable opportunities to connect with baseball minds across the world. For more information, go to sabr.org/join today. Steve Dittmore, you are fantastic. Thank you very much for this presentation. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I want to give a shout out to, I was noticing the little chat thing was going up as I was speaking, and I was curious what it all was, but the fact that you're pasting links in real time, you and Alec providing context to some of the things, that's wonderful. I appreciate
Alex is my right-hand man on that. I appreciate every time he does it. So
yeah.
Let's get everybody out of here. I want to thank Steve again, and we're going to see you next time. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. Have a great evening.